Hi there, my name is Matt Furness and this is The Culture Hack, a video and podcast series that captures experiences and life lessons from those who know culture best. The goal? To help you to understand, design and change your company culture. Thanks for tuning in. Hi everybody and welcome to The Culture Hack. It's Matt Furness here from Click Culture Consulting and I'm delighted to be joined today by Michelle Hartley. Now, Michelle is on a mission to transform HR from beige to brilliant. She's the founder of People Sorted, a specialist consultancy who help HR and businesses on all things people and culture. I'm really looking forward to talking to her today. So welcome, Michelle. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Awesome, lovely to have you here. And obviously, we'll be talking today about your not so beige insights on all things company culture. But before we go there, it'll be good to just back up and if you could just tell us a little bit more about your story and your background.
Oh yeah. Well, I always start with I'm a bit weird because I'm an HR lifer, and there aren't many HR lifers around. So I feel like a lot of HR people fell into HR, but I kind of always knew about it and wanted to be a part of it. So I'm an HR lifer. I started many moons ago after doing a job that took me through school, college, and university. So I waited tables for Pizza Hut. But within that, I got to experience some really great, like learning and development, talent development type stuff. And I got to become an area trainer. And I realized that people did this area training job for a job and it was called HR. So that's where it all really started. So I've been in HR for 23 years now. I've been in and around HR in terms of kind of roles, progression, industry. I've deliberately had a portfolio career. So I specialized in learning and development, I specialized in employee relations, and I have like a passion really about comms and creating like engaging moments through good communication. So I guess that's another little specialist arm that I've got. But broadly, overall, I would call myself an HR generalist and have worked across public sector, financial services, engineering, manufacturing, private medical, all that kind of stuff. So I've had a really good, I would say, like good breadth and depth around my career in HR. So absolutely love it. They still haven't turned me off people yet, and I'm still going.
Awesome. What a great introduction. I think this is probably the time where I'm meant to say you don't look old enough to have spent 23 years in HR, but I don't know if that's too creepy a thing to say on the podcast, so maybe I'll hold back.
That is exactly what you need to say.
We'll go with it. So across that 23 years then, you've obviously worked with plenty of businesses, both in-house and as a consultant. What I'm really curious about is what are the most stubborn or persistent or common challenges that you've come across, specifically relating to organizational culture?
Yeah, I think every HR person listening to this will probably immediately roll their eyes when I say this, but people are always the challenges, right? You can create the most beautiful model, structure, plan, strategy, wonderful setup, and there will always be people problems that get in your way in terms of that kind of engagement, the buy-in, the cynicism, the kind of internal organizational terrorists that are just desperate to wreck whatever it is you've created. So I always feel like that's been the most stubborn challenges. I think as I've got more senior in my in-house roles, I think that the interesting challenges have been much more around like the senior leadership team who in a number of organizations that I've worked in are almost quite different behind the closed doors, which is obviously where the boardroom happens and all the meetings happen. And I'm always really proud of myself for creating relationships where boards feel like they can be open with me, but equally boards feel like they can be open with me, and that becomes quite challenging because they may say things to me that they wouldn't say outside the room, but I know they're not happy or not buying in particularly into what we want to do. So short answer, people.
Mm,
Long answer, senior leadership team members.
yeah, and there's a couple of questions from me off the back of it. So the first one is what there'll be people listening who perhaps want to become the right hand person to people on the board, right? And trying to win that trust. So the first question is, how have you gone about doing that? How have you gone about getting into that sort of inner sanctum? And then the second question is, you mentioned a gap between how those leaders are showing up externally versus how they actually feel and what's actually going on. So could you tell me also a little bit more about what is it that you've noticed as being different between those two personas?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think in terms of getting into that inner sanctum space, I'd love to say that I've got this amazing thing, like a model, a tool, or approach. But I don't know that I do. I think it's for me, it's kind of almost my kind of take on it is I always see organizations and leadership teams within them like a bit of a bug in a glass, and that's always been my analogy is for those just listening, not watching, I'm holding the palm of my hand out with a fake glass on top of it. So I always see it like a bit of a bug in a glass. So I'm able to
Yeah.
just, I feel like I can kind of examine the different individuals. I can kind of observe what their needs and behaviors might be, and then I guess I'm a little bit of a chameleon in that sense, because I can kind of work out, what they might need, and therefore what they might need me to be, which can sometimes feel like, and I've talked about this a lot in my programs, but can sometimes feel a little bit weird, disingenuous, a bit almost manipulative kind of setup. But the way that I kind of make my peace with it is, I would say it's the prime example of situational leadership for me. So different leaders in different groups and different teams and individuals will get a different kind of leadership style, response, communication style from me, depending on what they need. And so for me it's about situational leadership, and that's how I kind of get into that inner sanctum, I guess, is creating a bit of a safe space, but also kind of making those relationships, connections, almost understanding like what the currency is of the organization, so I can then
Mm,
get in there and kind of try and understand it. So yeah, I don't know there's a particular kind of model or set of rules that I follow, but being that benign
yeah.
observer initially and then knowing what to apply where is probably a good space, I think, to start with.
Yeah. So it sounds like not being inauthentic. There's a tightrope
Mm,
between being authentic and
exactly. Yeah.
adapting yourself and being completely not you. And it sounds like the phrase I like is being yourself, but with skill. So you are being authentic
Mm,
whilst also simultaneously recognizing that the people around you have different needs, different preferences, and you're going to need to adapt the way you communicate, what you talk
exactly.
about with those people without necessarily becoming someone who isn't you. And, from the small number of interactions that we've had, I don't get the vibe that you would ever be inauthentic. So that makes sense. And then in terms of my second question then, so what do you notice as being different between what senior leaders have said publicly and actually what they really think is going on when it comes to people and culture?
Yeah, I think a lot of senior leaders are really cognizant of how they need to come across, right? So a lot of senior leaders, particularly in my experience, know how to, let's say, play the game. Again, it sounds a little bit manipulative. I don't mean it in that way, but they know what they need to say. They know how they need to come across. They know that they need to toe the party line with things like, culture strategy, organizational behaviors, that kind of stuff. But I think what happens is, or certainly in my experience, what happens is, behind that closed door, in that boardroom, in that office, wherever that may be, is that is effectively a safe space for leadership. And I'm really happy that I'm able to create that for leaders. I think the bit that affects me as a human trying to deliver something like a culture change project is I then hear stuff that I don't match up. It doesn't match up and kind of tally with what I see them delivering. And therefore, I feel like they can be being a bit inauthentic, because for me, when I operate, a piece of change in an organization or a project in an
Mm,
organization, I personally always find my hook. And I don't know if you're the same, but I have to find whatever my
mm,
connection is
mm,
to the thing that I'm doing, because then I can effectively sell it, right? And I can't do that kind of, I'm going to say this but do this. That's not me. And I think that comes back to that initial point you made about authenticity is I can't be inauthentic, so I have to find, however I'm going to buy into this thing, I have to find what my connection is. And I think where I see challenge with senior leaders is those that don't do that. And that's where I think that's a really strange thing for me. But maybe that's because I'm a perceptive human. I don't know. I find it really strange
mm,
that they,
mm.
they've not got their connection with it, whatever it is.
Yeah. So it sounds like perhaps our role as consultants and people in HR as well is to help those senior leaders to find a genuine, authentic connection to whatever it is that they're talking about. I used to deliver workshops with a
Exactly.
guy called Paul, and he is one of the most skilled deliverers I've ever seen. And one of the pieces of feedback and advice he gave to me was, whenever you're talking through anything, it could be a framework, a model, an example, you need to know how it relates to you. You need to be able to put yourself in it. And only then can you talk about it authentically because you've actually applied it to your world. And it sounds like a similar
Yeah.
thing, but with culture. The focus and the onus here is on helping leaders to make that genuine connection to that change or whatever it is, so that when they talk about it, it's coming from a place of lived experience and authenticity as opposed to something that they sort of don't quite connect with, it sounds like. So
Yes.
um, so let's talk now more about then what those leaders want typically are moving the culture towards, or the type of culture that businesses are trying to move towards. In your experience, what are the key shifts that you've seen a lot of organizations really try to make but struggle with?
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting because one of the definitions I use all of the time. So lots of people ask me to define what HR is, what they do, and actually my principle is HR makes connections. That's our job. We connect people to the organization, we connect the organization back to its strategy, we connect the leadership team to their teams, we connect people to the business plan, we connect people to results. That's what I see HR as being. And so for me, I feel like that's been the piece that we do as consultants and HR people in organizations is we help people to make connections. So that sounds like a really
Mm,
solid answer, doesn't it? I'm going to stop there.
good. It's good. And is that, do you mean, when you say connection, do you mean connection between people? Do you mean connection, for example, between culture, purpose, strategy? So, yeah, do you mean connection between people or connection between sort of concepts, ideas, things, or
Yeah.
both?
Well, everything and everything. Yeah. So I think for me, it's about getting those connections solid and getting them made. And I think when I work with leadership teams and when I've worked in house with leadership teams, that's always been the goal. You know, they'll say to me, and perhaps not in the same terms as you and I speak, but they'll say to me, you know, we really need to get this one moving, or we really need to get this landed, get it embedded, get it working. And for me, in my head, I'm literally thinking, right, okay, I'm connecting the teams to the strategy, or I'm connecting people to the business plan. And I think
Mm,
that's always the overarching goal. There's always some kind of connection that we need to make. And I think where organizations fall down is that they think it's just a thing. You know, it's a quick thing. Well, now we know it, so now it's good. So now we know what we need to
mm,
do. Jobs are good, and
mm,
let's all go and do
mm,
it. But the reality
mm.
is, it's never that smooth sailing, is it? And I think one of the
Yeah,
things that I've found really interesting, and I use a lot, is the double change curve, or the double S curve for change. I guess you've probably seen that. But when you work with leadership teams, or you're in the kind of inner sanctum of leadership teams in HR, you're on your own change curve, right? So you're kind of getting this adoption curve. You're getting to the space where you know what's going on. You've had the comms. You've
mm,
reached and gone through the pit of depression, and then you're ready to launch into the business. Well, of course, the leaders are done. You know, they're at the top of the hill. They're ready
yeah,
to move on to the next thing. But of course, when we look at our S curve, we then, the organization is
yes,
starting at a different point than we started, and so that's always really fascinating to me as a consultant, but also to plant with leadership teams I work with to say, hang on a minute, we need to think about this and how we're going to manage this. So that's always a really powerful one. I think when
yeah,
when you feel that little wobble and people are kind of slowly exiting the plan, you can kind of point that back out to them.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's similar to a metaphor I've heard of where it's like everyone around the business is running a race, but the senior leaders have a head start. So they're
Yes.
300 meters down the track. Meanwhile, they're looking behind them, and certain people haven't even started the race yet because the change or whatever it is hasn't been communicated to them, right? So it's a similar
Exactly that. Yeah.
idea. So what I'd love to know a little bit more about is, I guess, your approach to let's say you're working with a business who wants to change their culture in a certain way. Perhaps they've had, I don't know, they've got a new strategy, let's say, and they recognize that their culture isn't fit for purpose. Talk me through the types of steps or things that you would do in order to make sure that the business shifts its culture in that way.
Mm. I think for me, and maybe I'm oversimplifying it here, Matt, so feel free to batter me as I answer this question. But for me, the way that I try to operate is it needs to be simple, durable, and relatable. And so if it's not those things, it won't succeed. And so when I work with organizations and when I've worked in house, that's the position I operate on. So is it simple enough that we can understand it? Is it simple enough that we can relay it after one meeting and we can share it with somebody else in the next room? Is it going to be durable so that it will last for longer than 5 minutes? Can we see this reaching into the future and supporting our goals? And then the relatable piece is about how can we make it connect to people at all different levels in all different ways. And I think if we've got that in place, it will land. And I think so those are the kind of
Yeah,
principles that I operate from, is simple, durable, relatable,
yeah,
and that's all it needs to be. In my
yeah.
opinion, it might be oversimplifying, but
What,
that's
what,
how I see it.
yeah, what I liked about that is it rolled off your tongue. So it's clearly something that's ingrained within your sort of approach and philosophy, simple, durable, and relatable. Um, and therefore it's memorable, and therefore you're more likely to stick to it. I've seen plenty of sort of models, frameworks, and then you've got framework upon framework, and it's like
Yes.
people are so confused with what's going on that it's never going to stick. And for any sort of movement or change, things need to be memorable or at least simple enough to do something about, right? So I like
Yeah.
that. What I'd love to know then is almost like some a case study or an initiative or a program or something that you've been particularly proud of, which perhaps puts into practice those ideas of simple, durable, and relatable.
Mm. I think actually it's probably my last in-house position, where I was there for 7 years as the HR director, and what we wanted to do was to move the organization from being a bit of a cottage industry kind of family feel organization to becoming a much more kind of, and corporate sounds negative, doesn't it? But a much more commercial, let's say, a much more commercial entity delivering year on year clear profit. And so what we started with was, okay, well, we need to communicate this. Let's start with the basics. So here comes the simple. Let's just communicate it. Let's just see where it goes. Because my assessment when I first started was, we had this glorious 34-page Word document that expressed, our position in the industry and what we wanted to do and what our competitors were doing and why we were better than them. And that document, they worked with consultants to produce, and it just sat in a drawer. Nobody looked at it. Nobody in the business had seen it. Nobody understood it. Nobody knew really what it meant. It was just this, statement of intent. And so the initial space was, let's just start communicating it. So year one was essentially like a theatre style, all hands meeting. Everybody turned up. We started to just talk about what we wanted to do, all the way through to when we got to the end of that process, and it was an iterative process, right? So, year two became something a bit more workshoppy. Year three, we were going out into the regions rather than bringing in everybody centrally. Year four became something much more organic and creative. So it very much became, we are creating our business plan together. Here we are. We're going around all of the country, working with all of our teams. We will meet with 100% of our employees, and we will talk to you about what you want from the business plan. And what we went from at the final year was 98% of employees understood their part in our business plan, and we had gone from 25 million revenue to 75 in that period of time, and with great EBIT following along. So we kind of managed to treble our revenue and follow along with great EBIT as we were going. So I guess it sounds really easy when you say it fast in a podcast, doesn't it? But it was a massive challenge and a huge piece of work to do. But I think what needed to happen, and certainly when I was working with the CEO, where we got to was, actually, we've got to do almost two pieces of buy-in here. One is with the senior leadership team, and the second is with the rest of the organization. And actually, the only way that we could get the leadership team on board was to get them in front of the employees and get them talking, because when that happened, they could
Mm.
suddenly see light bulbs coming on, people asking questions, a level of engagement they weren't expecting. And so instead of having, quite a chunky strategy being delivered by 5 humans in the senior leadership team, what we had by the end was a really solid, clear,
Yeah,
simple, durable, repeatable strategy that was delivered by 200 humans in the organization, rather than, 5 people sat in an office. So it worked really, really well.
yeah,
And I think, I guess, to touch on some of the other bits that we've already covered, that the most powerful sessions in those programs were the ones where we literally had people up and storytelling. So tell me about a time when you've seen this in action, or tell me about a time when you've seen the opposite of this in action, and we could get these great stories out, which suddenly then became a way to embed, the culture, the values, the aims and goals that we had back into people, because they would remember the story. One of the stories we talked about was
Mm.
randomly a G-Tech air ram, because it wasn't our organisation, by the way. We were talking about, a vacuum cleaner that just had a really, really relevant, singing, resonating piece to one of our strategy objectives. So, and that worked really well, and it just seemed to land with everybody in the organisation. So, yeah, I think that's the power of
So
storytelling and connecting people.
yeah, so it sounds like revenue increased, and meanwhile, sort of engagement and buy-in and appreciation of your role in the bigger picture increased as well over that time. Reading between the lines, it sounds like the biggest contributing factor towards that was sort of comms awareness and buy-in of the strategy. Was there anything else that you think was really critical in making that shift?
Yeah, I think it was bringing it to the people, which sounds a bit cheesy, doesn't it? But actually bringing it to them rather than delivering it to them. It's bringing it to them in a way that they could connect, engage, and have input on it. So we also did, and again, coming back to that initial introduction that I talked about in terms of that comms fascination, for me, there was a massive fascination with, instead of just taking on board all of these things that you've told us and then waiting till next year to tell you why we haven't done them, we started to kind of just get into this habit of you said we did. So, what they told us in each of those meetings came back out, every month and said, you've told us you want this, here's what we've done, or you've told us you want this, here's why we can't do it. But it just became a really regular, like, heartbeat of the organization, where we could just start, saying, you've told us this, we've listened, here's what we've got for you. And it just became a really great habit for us to get into over all those years.
Mm. What I quite like about what you just said is you sort of snuck it in there, but you said we couldn't do it because I think what frustrates
Mm,
a lot of people is not hearing anything. Bad news is better than no news, I think, because at least bad news
exactly.
shows we've heard you, we've
Yeah.
listened, we can't act on it because of ABC. People aren't kids. Like, they might have a moan, but if you talk to them like adults, treat them like adults, they're more likely to think you actually care and are listening. So I really like that. So we're starting to get
Yes.
into the sort of the stuff that you've done and the lessons that you've taken. What My next question then is, what is about the lessons that you've taken? And usually I talk about what you'd wish you'd known 10 years ago, but let's go 23 years ago. So what do you wish you'd known about culture 23 years ago that a far more wise Michelle today it knows, and sort of like off the back of her hand?
That's such a good question. And when I think back to 23 years ago, like, makes my heart hurt. Little Michelle. I think the biggest thing that I wish I'd known, way back when, was I didn't have to do it by myself. And I think I see that even today in a lot of the HR people that I work with, is we often think, we have to go and do all of this by ourselves. We have to go and be, the cultural pioneer, and we have to go and create all the things by ourselves. And, we have to just do it because we can't possibly ask for budget, or we can't possibly ask for support. But actually, had I known that 23 years ago, A, I probably wouldn't have burned out. But B, I think it's knowing that actually creating something with others in relevant spaces can be really, really powerful, and actually can have a much better impact than just you creating something that seemingly looks perfect at the beginning and doesn't kind of allow for input, engagement, connection, communication kind of stuff. So I think it's about not having to do it by yourself is the biggie for me.
Mm. I think that's one of those things for me. It's sort of like exercise and your diet. When you think about it rationally, you go, well, yeah, of course, like, I'll get better ideas. I won't take it all on my own shoulders. I'll get the extra buy-in and ownership. Just as with your exercise, you should be doing 10,000 steps a day or whatever it is, or you should be exercising 4 times a week. You should be eating fruit and veg and all that stuff. Sometimes there's a big gap between that knowledge and actually doing it. And I think often we find ourselves with that knowledge, knowing we should reach out, but something stops us, right?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
yeah, that would be my reflection on that. I'm not sure if you'd agree.
Yeah, no, completely. I think it's really interesting, isn't it? We often just think that it's our responsibility, and I feel like there's power in that connection and collaboration space. So yeah, I think it's a really biggie for me.
And moving on to a similar question then, what's one big myth about company culture that you'd like debunked? So this is perhaps something that you know that you think the wider industry is sort of misled to believe.
Yeah, I think, you know what, I think the thing is that people think, creating culture, strategy, values, all of those great things is really complicated and has to be, a big, sexy, scary, complicated thing. And I just don't think it needs to be. I think, and actually I posted about it yesterday, funnily enough, but a lot of HR people will come to me and they say, what do I do? How do I make a culture? What's the secret ingredients of the culture piece I need to do? And I always say to them, it's them. Like you're the magic. Like you're the secret sauce. You're the one that makes it right. Because anybody can, as we said literally before we started recording, anybody can go and Google, right? Anybody can go and Google what the key elements of corporate culture are. Anybody can Google how do I write a strategy? How do I create a set of values? Um, and actually, it doesn't need to be complicated. I think what we need to do is think about the joy of what we bring as consultants, as HR people, as specialists, is we are the special source. We are those people that make that connection. And we are the ones that make it magical because anybody can do it. It's not complicated. Anybody can do it. What you have to do is use your organizational knowledge, use your kind of awareness of the people, the characters, the industry, the organization, and pull it together using those key elements. So for me, I think it
Mm.
doesn't need to be complicated, and that HR people or people driving the culture are the special sauce.
Yeah, and on that idea of simplicity, it links nicely to the last question that I've got for you, which is about a culture hack. So something small, simple that you can do in order to positively develop culture, something small but that can also have a big impact. What would you say that culture hack would be?
Ooh, I feel like I've got two, and one is to let it be easy. And it's funny, my coach said this to me a little while back. Um, what would it look like if you let it be easy? And so for me, that's the hack for culture stuff is what if we let this be easy? What would it look like? Because often what you come back to is one of the core elements that you need. So I would say let it be easy. And then the second is to recognize. So recognizing all of those small wins. It does not have to be expensive and complicated, but recognizing and amplifying those small wins will make a massive, massive difference. So we had, for example, and it's a very small micro example, we had an office regeneration, which was part of the investment we made after we'd had our first big year of higher revenues. So we redid the office, cost us a lot of money. We had a competition internally to name the office meeting rooms. We had a number of submissions. We picked one that was, Great British Engineers. It's an engineering organisation. But what we did was anybody who had a great idea, anybody who submitted, anybody who engaged with the activity got a box of after eights. And on the after eights, we made a label that said, thank you for your engagement. But actually, what that did was we did like little pictures, we had photos of everybody with their chocolates. Everybody went mad because they got chocolates and they got to kind of share them. It was a bit tongue in cheek, it was funny. But all of a sudden, everybody knew why the rooms were called after British engineers. Everybody knew it was a competition. Suddenly,
Mm,
everybody wanted to know what the next thing was going to be that we got involved with. So something that's as small as, I mean, I think it must have been £8 on after eights is
mm,
enough to kind of
mm.
get people involved and engaged. So I would say let it be easy and celebrate every small win and amplify every small win that you have.
Yeah, I think on that second one, making people feel seen and
Yes.
as though just making people feel seen. It's free, and or £8 if you're just buying a few boxes of after eights. makes a huge difference to people's days, right?
Yes.
There's all these statistics about
Yes.
the percentage of people who don't feel recognized and valued at work. Like, it's not rocket science. Just make people feel that you recognize what they're doing, what they're saying, their efforts consistently, and that will make a massive difference in itself. In terms of the let it be easy one, tell me a little bit more about what you mean when you say let it be easy.
So I feel like, for example, when I've worked on, business plan rollouts or, big organizational comms projects, that kind of stuff, asking the question of, what would this look like if we let it be easy? It almost takes away all of that. For me, it's like it's like the big sigh just comes out. It's just that like, oh, actually, okay, if we let it be easy, what could it look like? Because often what happens is we overcomplicate in the detail, don't we? And actually letting it be easy,
Got it.
for
Yeah.
example, rolling out a strategy, letting it be easy is, do you know what? Worst case, we'll turn up at a hotel and have a conversation. And that's that principle of like letting it be easy because maybe it's an inner confidence because you're the secret sauce. That you'll get out something good from it. And so letting it be easy is just letting it work and let it happen.
Got it. Right. Makes sense. I think a question that I've heard that I really like which is similar-ish. It's if you only had like 1 hour to do this, what would you do? And it helps you to really strip back all of the
Yes.
detail and just go, what are the easy things we could do that take barely any effort and time, but that will actually make a difference, and it helps you get really ruthlessly
Yeah.
focused, as opposed to, I think, so much of business, like people are just running around like headless chickens, and they're busy fools, but they're not actually answering the exam question very well. And so I like that. It's
Yeah.
like, what would the easy option be? And it forces that constraint of difficulty, forces you to think about what's actually really important here. So look, so I'm
Exactly.
conscious that we could talk about this all day. I'm conscious of your time, conscious of the listeners' time. Do you have any final reflections on our conversation before we wrap up?
Oh, I just feel like it's been really interesting. I've really enjoyed it. I feel like we should do this every week. I just feel like it's been really fascinating. I think there's some really good kind of principles to take away, aren't there, in terms of maybe if we finish on simple, durable, and relatable. Maybe that's where we finish. But I think that that has been my kind of internal personal mantra over a number of years, but I would hope that kind of gives people in the middle of strategic cultural pieces of work, gives them a little bit of hope that it can be done.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, simple, durable, and relatable. It's a shame that they don't spell something. Like, you could make relatable
I
something else, and then
know.
it becomes like prod or sad or I don't know. That's a shame. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing your time, your experiences, your expertise. I really do appreciate it. And if people want to contact you after listening, what's the best way of them doing so?
The easiest way to find me is to look me up on LinkedIn. So I am Michelle Hartley, finder of awesome on LinkedIn. You can't miss me. I'm the one with the rainbow colour profile.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So yeah, thank you so much, Michelle. And if you like this episode, please do listen to our other episodes for more first-hand experiences and lessons on all things culture. Otherwise, that's all for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and go well, everybody.